Though depicting the same course of events and much of the same characters, the endings of the two lone entries in Gilligan's series couldn't be any more different. Whereas Breaking Bad was the last act of a great man's will against the constraints placed upon him by external forces once more, Better Call Saul's ending saw outward, looking for reintegration with the environment from which those constraints originally situate. This naturally comes from a matter of the character which we follow. The apotheosis of Heisenberg contrasts sharply with Saul Goodman, a weaker, more intermediary figure who eludes any trappings of a king. Within both of these characters lie a period of solitude that best brings out the idiosyncrasies of their internal constitution and the strongest of their broader relationships. For Saul Goodman, the latter of this indubitably remains with Kim Wexler. Much can be said about Jimmy McGill and his honest, almost innocent nature, and how notably he falls prey to sin, fully knowing the consequence. Though his brother Chuck may be best described as having done nothing but fed into Jimmy's tendency for wickedness, he worded this balancing act crudely but best as such.
No, why have regrets at all? What's the point?
What do you mean?
Well, look at you. You're in so much pain. Why are you putting yourself through all this?
Because I wanted to tell you
That you have regrets. And I'm telling you, don't bother. What's the point? You're just going to keep hurting people.
that's not true.
Jimmy, this is what you do. You hurt people over and over and over. And then there's this show of remorse.
It's not a show.
I know you don't think it's a show. I don't doubt your emotions are real. But what's the point of all the sad faces and the gnashing of teeth? If you're not going to change your behavior, and you won't, why not just skip the whole exercise?
However, this may be beguiling. Jimmy's feelings of regret are very real, but tinged with the same runaway excuses and evasions of responsibility. Whether it's playing up family ties to Chuck in the same scene, or blaming the circumstances of Howard's death entirely on Lalo. Jimmy is stuck in his own world removed from the full 5-letter word of guilt. He explores this world incessantly in his ever-elevating scheme with Kim against Howard, and his colossal sense of inferiority to his older brother Chuck and his world. Perhaps best elucidated in this scene to the scholarship selectee.
You made a mistake, and they are never forgetting it. As far as they're concerned, your mistake is just, it's who you are, and it's all you are.
This is where Jimmy's relationship with Kim comes into play. Kim herself is far from pure, but compared to others, she is the only one to understand and directly influence Saul's world, which itself is unclean. Jimmy clearly finds no good example to follow in pure figures such as father, but even this is tenuous, sensitive to aspersion, and at a critical point, destruction. What is important in this relationship, however, is communication. Chuck is on an entirely different plane from which he judges Jimmy, and betrays his moments of honesty as in the debacle over Jimmy's confession to tampering. Though Howard has honesty, he carries the whiff of Chuck's world and quickly becomes the straw man onto which both Jimmy and Kim admonish from abroad. Jimmy does not even attempt to engage with Howard in a way that is reciprocal. Only with Kim can he be truthful even in lies and have someone that understands his past and present, even appreciating and finding excitement in his low-born nature. On one hand, it is Jimmy's single attachment to the quote-unquote civil society he feels alienated from, starting right from his prospective civil punishment in the Chicago sunroof incident. On the other hand, the reason she revels in and finds excitement in Jimmy's scams is exactly because she shares that sense of alienation, propelling their relationship to begin with. Kim's excitement is always tempered by her laxity in the consequences, a trait born from her mother's own delinquency, but it remained true in her case at least. For the store owner, it was a single item. For their rich patrons, an expensive tab. To Erickson and the judge, a headache. And for Howard, a minor career setback. Unlike Jimmy, who does bad things and feels remorse for it later, Kim is distanced from guilt because her actions are justified as minor offenses at best, like shoplifting, with little to no repercussions in the victim's case. There is nothing to feel guilty about. This also being the reason for why she feels so strongly about being a defense lawyer, providing the best deal for her clients, who are often portrayed as having taken poor decisions under a momentary lapse of judgment, but are certainly not completely detached from civil society as Saul's later clients. But even with this goodwill and respect for most aspects of due process and rehabilitation, she lacks the heavy hand of the law that so disconnected Jimmy from his own brother Chuck. For this reason, Jimmy feels comfortable in confessing, communicating honestly with her, for the understanding and lack of judgment that comes as part of her nature here. This contrasts roughly with how Jimmy views most of everyone else, however. At an early age, a man relays his philosophy of sheeps and wolves to him quite simply and cheekily. Contextually, his own father was the sheep, the sucker getting scammed, and the man the wolf. Saul displays this best in his job interview, though in a manner that is dismissive and almost disillusionary with how easy it is for others to be swindled. This simple phrase of quote-unquote wolves and sheep becomes the maxim for Saul's entire worldview. Even when he may find his conscience struck, he is able to double back with that old rationale. As Saul closes the bond trial with Lalo that virtually set him free, he is able to peel his eyes off to the victim's family for once and affirm a declaration of godhood to Howard. Howard, who pricks his sense of inferiority and pours forth the opposite perspective in dissidence towards the man and all he stands for. There is likely no coincidence in Howard and Lalo being related in this way and in death. Howard is the most innocent character in the entire show, completely disconnected from the underworld in which Lalo is an apt model to represent at its most cold-blooded. The death of Howard is a broader death of innocence. The complete melding of both the civil and underworld that Jimmy and Saul had split like the sky and earth. And upon his death, so too we find the disruption of Jimmy and Kim. Consequences fall on Kim, which brings true guilt, something that eludes Jimmy himself. As soon as this disruption comes to pass, and Jimmy is bereft of this last connection, he falls into solitude, into Saul Goodman and everything that the underworld entails. Walt too reached the peak of his empire once he shreds such feelings of obligation as well. With Jimmy, Walt shares a similar position Chuck once held, though in a very opposite environment. A highly intelligent man who needs Jimmy or Saul as much as he lacks respect for him, even coming to emulate Chuck's quirks in the basement scene. So too does he judge Saul's supposed inborn nature. So you were always like this. And once the die has been cast, leaving Saul stranded, a long way from home under a new name, he bristles even further in this solitude. Only his escapades with Jeff provide an outlet for his criminal antics and to flex his street smarts. But with this small return to form comes creeping the unveiling of his hitherto repressed underbelly of regret. His conversation with Kim invariably turns sour because of this same disconnect, later manifesting Kim's guilt once more. It is precisely here where Saul's self-sabotage becomes pronounced, and upon hearing of Kim's confession to the authorities, he tramples upon his own deal. More than some act of love, this was an equalization for Jimmy, a purposeful redemption for the civil society that he once spurned, and to finally face guilt after years of repression and excusatory rhetoric born from his own neuroses. It is notable how he talks of how Walt could have not built his empire without him. This may be seen simply as one-upping Walt or ensuring his guilt in the case, but I think it is a step further in renouncing also the heights of the underworld which had no respect for him, as did Chuck in the world of law. Only by doing this may he finally confront guilt and feel peace, making it so that he can once more be closer to Kim, whom he previously alone confessed to and admired in fortitude even then. Physically, he may be in chains, but mentally, he may be free for the first time in his life.